Okay, looks like we're live. So welcome everyone, welcome. I wanna thank everyone first of all for joining me last week for the relaunch of the Dr. Rose podcast show. The response and the feedback and the commentary was overwhelming. We had nearly 3,000 people with all the social media outlets, and I haven't even checked iTunes yet, tune into that show. So I want to thank you guys. You made a girl feel good. And as always, I want to come to you all with topics and conversations, candid conversation about topics that oftentimes we avoid because, it's not necessarily, the pretty things in life, but, as I always say, only through dialogue will change occur. And we have to talk about those things that we oftentimes avoid just so we can grow and so we can embrace a life that's full of fulfillment and happiness and optimal mental wealth and mental well-being. So tonight's show, I'm so pleased to have the Reverend Dr. April Hearn, and I'll tell you a little bit about herself in a moment. But this show is going to be discussing domestic abuse, domestic violence, and we're going to touch on domestic violence in Christian homes, but this applies to domestic violence all across the board, and particularly how domestic violence impacts individuals in adulthood. Because even though it may have happened to you, you witnessed domestic violence as a child, you go forward 10, 20, 30, 40 years and beyond, believe it or not, it's still impacting you emotionally as well as physically. So we want to talk about that. But before I introduce my esteemed guests here, I want to just share some information and some research on this very topic here. So recent research has actually found that witnessing abuse as a child carries the same risk of harm to children's mental health as if they had experienced the abuse themselves. So even though they may not have been, abused, physically abused themselves, witnessing a parent or just an adult in a household experiencing domestic abuse has the same impact on them. And actually brain imaging, this is so interesting here, brain imaging in infants shows that exposure to domestic violence, even as they're sleeping or even in utero. So even if the mother is pregnant and she's experiencing domestic violence, it can actually impact and reduce parts of the brain, change the brain's overall structure, which can lead to learning disabilities, emotional problems later on in life, as well as physical problems, including inflammation. They found a lot of inflammation disease. So those are your autoimmune diseases, your lupus, just any autoimmune disease that people have actually can start developing as a child in utero or throughout your childhood as an effect of witnessing domestic violence. So I'm gonna let my esteemed guest take it over, but I'm gonna introduce her first. She's a great, great friend, one of my nearest, dearest, oldest friends. We've been friends since sixth grade. So, for 10 years.
Right, right.
Yeah. So the doctor, Reverend April Hearn, or Reverend A, as she's lovingly referred to by the congregation at New Prospect, she was licensed in 2000 in Little Rock, Arkansas, and later ordained to the gospel ministry at New Prospect Missionary Baptist Church here in Detroit by her beloved pastor, of course, the late Reverend Dr. Wilman R. Johnson in 2009. So and I'm not going to read this because it's too formal, but I want to just tell you about this girl here, because in addition to having her doctorate in divinity, correct? Or you correct me, doctor of ministry, she has a wealth of undergrad and master's degree in sciences. So she blends not only just spirituality and religion, but she has this background in science, which I just love because she's so powerful when she just teaches, and she's on that platform just helping others to understand the word and helping others to just live their best life. And it's not just coming from one dimension, like she's coming from all different dimensions. Like I said, science and spirituality and religion as well. So welcome, friend.
Hey, friend.
You look pretty. She made me go clean myself up.
I'm so excited to be here tonight. And I was sharing with Rose the other night when we were talking. We talk like this often. We have these kinds of conversations almost every day, these in-depth and enlightening conversations. And there were often times when we'd be talking about something and we'd say, you know, we really should be live having this discussion because our discussions are so deep, so in-depth. We both glean from one another. And I'm honored and I'm so delighted to share with you in your podcast. And yeah, the people who are watching via social media and listening via the podcast, they'll get the opportunity to eavesdrop on a conversation between two friends. So I'm excited about that.
So I want to start by having you share why you wanted to come. You know, I wanted you to come, of course, but why this topic is near and dear to your heart, this whole topic of domestic violence.
Okay. When I desired to pursue a Doctor of Ministry degree, you have to select a problem or an issue that exists within the church, an issue that you want to confront, an issue that you want to address. And before I even registered, I knew that I wanted to address domestic abuse, specifically in Christian homes. Growing up, and Rose is familiar with this story, but growing up, I was raised during my early years by my maternal grandparents, my mother's mom and dad. And I was raised out in the country in Savoy, Mississippi, which is outside of Meridian. My grandparents.
That's where the accent comes from.
That's where the accent comes from. I am a Southern woman that happens to live in the city. But I was raised by my grandparents in my early years. Until I was 4.5. So I was with them from the time I was a baby until I was 4.5. And I had such freedom with my grandparents. We had chickens and horses and hogs and all that kind of stuff. And my granddaddy was sort of my sidekick, or I was his sidekick. And my grandmother was the nurturing type, and she's the one who taught me how to pray every night. And my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, lived up the hill from my grandparents. So these are the people who were influential in me being raised with such a vibrancy for life. And, you know, to this day, I don't like shoes because I wasn't forced to wear shoes. They didn't even force me to put my feet in shoes unless we were going somewhere or going to church. Other than that, I got to walk barefoot. I pretty much got to run at the place. I got to do what I wanted to do. But it wasn't until, and now I was hardly ever, if ever, chastised. Just the idea of my grandparents being disappointed in me, I think was chastisement enough. So when I came to Detroit to be with my parents, there was a shift.
How old were you then?
I was 4.5 when my parents came and got me from my grandparents. And so there was a shift in the environment. There was a shift. And I didn't realize that my family was different than other families until I started spending time with other families. I just thought my family was the way that it was. And the type of abuse that existed in our home varied from time to time. It wasn't always physical. It wasn't always emotional. It wasn't always psychological. Even though my father yelled a lot. He yelled a lot. And so my first memory of a jarring moment as a child, I wrote it in my dissertation that I was sitting there. I was small enough to sit in one of those plastic red chairs. And we're sitting there and we're watching the Jeffersons. And I've always loved to sing. I've been singing since I can remember. And I remember sitting there in my little plastic red chair and I'm singing the jingle to the Jeffersons. I'm singing the intro to the Jeffersons. And my father yells at me and says, "Would you shut up?" He turned the TV off to get my attention and yells at me and says, "Would you shut up?" Yeah. Now, to some,
4.5. 4.5 at this time.
I was young. I had to be maybe, I was small enough to fit in a small chair. Now, to some, that might not be anything, but to a child who had freedom to exist, that was crushing to me. The older I became, the more I realized that my household was different. And I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't share with anyone. And the thing about abuse and growing up in a home where there is abuse, regardless of what type of abuse it is, the thing about growing up in a household where there's abuse is the child learns to compartmentalize their lives. We went to church every Sunday, and you learn to compartmentalize your life. So the things that make you sad, or the things that cause you to cry or to be afraid, I spent a lot of my time afraid. And the thing about abuse is that it's also coupled with a loving atmosphere. So my family, although different, we still went to dinner every Friday night as a family. My dad and I laughed and joked all the time. My father and I shared a love for taking things apart and putting them back together. So I spent many an evening in the garage helping my daddy with his motorcycles, learning how to clean carburetors on cars. My dad loved to crack jokes. We loved science. So I would be allowed to break my bedtime to sit up with him and watch Wild Kingdom. So
I just want to, just to be clear, Dr. April, you said your household was different. I want everyone to understand. So it wasn't just the yelling.
It wasn't just the yelling.
Yeah.
There was physical abuse in my home. There was emotional abuse in my home. And you talked about how there is long-term effects of abuse. One of the long-term effects was the triggering of my senses. So whereas I didn't see it, I heard it. I would sometimes see the aftermath or the after effects of it. And I was in my 30s when the nightmares stopped. There's one image, there's one memory that haunted me into my 30s. And it wasn't until I broke my own silence, and I believe I was teaching a women's conference. I was teaching at a women's conference, and I finally said out of my mouth that there was physical abuse in my home, that I was a survivor of abuse, and that there were these types of abuse. There was physical, emotional, mental abuse, and we went to church.
Yes.
It wasn't until I broke my silence that the violence in my mind stopped. So my parents divorced when I was in the 10th grade, but the violence in my mind didn't stop until I was well into my 30s. And it was at that point that I realized the more that I shared my reality, the more that I shared my experiences, not only was I becoming free from the torment, but other people were then being given permission to share their stories. Other women would come to me and talk to me about their stories. And it made me want to know more about abuse in Christian homes and all of the components that allow this monster to exist. The statistics are this: in secular society, it is projected that 1 in 4 adult women have experienced some form of abuse in their lifetime, regardless of where it is on the spectrum. It's 1 in 3, excuse me. For the Christian home, it's 1 in 4. So in secular society, it's 1 in 3. In the Christian home, it's 1 in 4. So that means within the Christian community, if you have 400 people, then 100 of them have been impacted by abuse at some level. And what is an indictment on the Christian community is that if it were cancer and 100 of your members had been impacted by cancer, you would go out of your way to hold workshops, to have health fairs, to have experts come in and generate conversation or share information. You would go out of your way to fight against losing members of your congregation to this deadly disease. Well, the fact is, if you have 400 people in your congregation, then 100 of them have been impacted by abuse. If you have 40 people in your family, guess what? The numbers are higher than you would like for them to be. And think about it. If in our own families, if there are 12 of you in the family and multiple numbers of your family members have been diagnosed with cancer, and you then say, well, cancer runs in our family. We're predisposed to cancer. Well, if the numbers are factual when it comes to domestic abuse and domestic violence or intimate partner violence, as it's referred to now, families would go out of their way to try and help those people who were in trouble. If it were cancer, you would do something about it. If it were cancer, you would go and get DNA testing, you would go and see specialists, you would do whatever you needed to do in order to break the cycle. Why do we allow this monster to remain silent? We invite violence to the dinner table. We allow violence to show up for Christmas.
Let's talk about the whys behind it, because we've been friends since 6th grade. And I'm just hearing this story in the last couple years.
Right.
I'm just hearing this story, you know, and it's almost like as a friend, because I would go over your house, we would bake cookies. I mean, you know, we did a lot of things together.
Right.
High school, we spent a lot of time together. And as a person who did not realize that this was what you were experiencing, you know, 10, 20, 30 years down the line, I'm like, oh my God, how did I miss that? But why, you know, let's talk about the whys. Why did it take until you were 30 to be able to speak that truth?
Well, one of the first contributors to abuse being able to exist within the home is denial. That is the primary factor. So there is denial that it is not happening in our home. It is not happening in our family. It's certainly not happening in our church. Many leaders don't want to believe it's happening within their communities and their Christian congregations. And so we deny. Oftentimes we deny it because we're only looking for one indicator. We're only looking for physical abuse. We don't think about the emotional, the mental, the financial, the technological abuse that happens nowadays, in addition to the spiritual abuse that happens.
So technological abuse, what is
that? So
that?
Technological abuse might be someone putting a tracker on your phone, or someone needing the password to your phone at all times. You know, if you love me, you'll give me the password to your phone. Why can't I check your phone? Or, you know, why is it you don't want me to know your whereabouts? And to the mind that has been predisposed to, has been pre-exposed to some type of emotional abuse or intimate partner violence, they will romanticize what they're hearing. And they'll think, well, oh, he just loves me. Oh, she just loves me. Oh, they just care so much about me. They want to make sure that I'm okay. No, that is a form of control. And at its root, abuse is about control. It's about one person wanting control over another person. So the first component is denial. Deny it's even happening. The second component is the silence. How many times within the African-American community do we teach our children what happens in the home stays in the home? When we say things like what happens in the home stays in the home, you are training them to become liars.
Yes.
I was a good liar as a kid. As a child, I was a good liar. As an adult, I became a great liar.
Oh, wow.
Because you learn to lie with a straight face. Because what happens in the home stays in the home. You don't tell anyone. You can't share it with anyone. I never felt comfortable sharing with my friends, whether it was you, my friends from school, or my friends from church. I never felt comfortable telling anyone about what was happening in my home. Never. At the age of 40, blah, 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 I've only heard 3 sermons ever preached from the pulpit that denounce abuse. And I preached one of them. So in my 40-something years of existence, there has not only been denial, but there is silence. In the dissertation, I call it the holy hush. There's certain things that we just don't talk about. We ignore them. And so violence is allowed to exist because we refuse to speak it out of our mouths, and we teach our children to lie, which is baffling to me, because in the mind of a child, you want me to lie or ignore the truth and not tell anyone else, but then you don't want me to lie to you. So there will be times that I would get in trouble, be chastised, get a whooping for lying to my parents, but I had been trained to lie.
Yes.
I've been trained to lie. The third component is a lack of training for our religious leaders. There are many who have not sought training. There are a lot of them who may be abusive in their own right, and so they have no desire to be trained. They have no desire to have anyone.
That's part of the denial too.
That's part of the denial. They have no desire to have anyone come in and share this information because they don't want the sheep to wake up. Mm-hmm. They don't want the congregation to figure out that, hey, my male or female pastor has been acting in this way, and that is abusive. Another reason is because for the church and the Christian community, the family is the cornerstone of what we do. And so mm-hmm. if we start addressing the reality of the monster that exists in many of our homes, then what does that say about us as a community? What does that say about our church? What does that say about me as a leader? And so unfortunately, a lot of leaders are not educated on abuse. I have a master's degree in divinity. Not one time in the 5 years that it took me to get my master's degree in divinity was there ever a class on abuse. Yeah. They taught me about the Old Testament. They taught me about church history. I took a whole year of church history. They taught me about the Old Testament. I studied Greek. Mm-hmm. Not mm-hmm. one class on abuse.
Yeah. I want you to, and I know there's other components that I definitely want to hit on, especially one that's just all, I went to go see Reverend April do a presentation at her church, New Prospect. And I was only going in for a short time because I had a meeting shortly thereafter, but I was so just drawn in by the information she was giving, just opening up and exposing me to this ugly little secret that exists in far too many homes that I had to stay and just absorb it all. So, that other component we'll get to, I want to just touch on just adulthood now and adult relationships now and the impact that exposure to domestic violence as a child, be it if you're a female watching it or you're a male watching it, it doesn't matter if it's your mom inflicting it on your dad or your dad inflicting it on your mom or them inflicting it oftentimes on each other.
Right.
What happens down the line once those children start entering into romantic, intimate relationships? I want you to even approach that even from your own experience. Okay. Of what you now, as you've been able to speak your truth, as you've done all this research, you wrote a dissertation, wrote a book about it.
You wrote a book about it.
As you've been able to just delve into this and really be honest and transparent, which we are so appreciative of. And I want to encourage everyone watching this, share this video because trust me, there are family members and friends now that you don't realize are going through this and they need to watch this. Share the video, start a watch party because this is some important information here. What did you, and you can speak personally from yourself and from what you've learned in research. And I'll share stories as a clinical psychologist, what I've seen, in my 22 years of practice from the impact that exposure to this type of abuse has on individuals when they enter into these adult intimate relationships, when they witness this intimate partner abuse as a child in these formative years. Tell me about your experience with that.
Well, for me personally, because I had secrets, I began to draw people who also had secrets. Mm-hmm. And when I say secrets, I mean people who were addicted to drugs, mm-hmm. or people who were master liars and deceivers. And I was able to remain in those relationships because I had secrets. Yeah. And so what we don't realize is the energy or the woundedness that we project is the woundedness that comes to us. It finds a home with us. And so in my relationship,
I want you to say that again. We've all heard the law of attraction or like attracts like, but I like the way you put that.
Yeah. Whatever energy, whatever spiritual hook you send out, mm-hmm. is the same thing that is then drawn into you. It finds a home and a safe place with you because you're not going to tell, because you've learned to keep your mouth shut. And as long as you have things that you're holding secret and you're harboring them in your heart, then this person with all these types of secrets, they feel at home with you. And you'll both end up miserable. You both end up miserable. Because at first you then begin thinking, well, why do these types of people keep coming to me? Or why am I always in relationships with these type of people? Well, this person was like this and that person was like that. Well, it's because you were lying, living a lie. You're not willing to tell the truth about who you are and what is called you to become the person that you are. And so these people find a home with you. They find comfort with you because you're not about to open your mouth because you like to keep things pretty. What I learned to do, Rose, I learned to look perfect. I learned to look perfect. There's a thing within Christendom where we celebrate the illusion of perfection because none of us are perfect. But in Christendom, especially Black church, we celebrate the illusion of perfection. We want our leaders to be perfect. We want the person on the pew next to us to be perfect. We don't want you coming in here with your problems, which is another reason why there are certain things we won't address, because we're only comfortable with certain things. We're only comfortable. We'll pray for you about your cancer, and we'll lift you up when it's time for you to go chemo. But you always coming in here talking about he's doing this to you or she's doing that to you. Well, she's doing that to you. Why don't you man up? God made you the man of the house. Why don't you man up? Well, he's treating you like that. The Bible says that you're supposed to obey. What about your vows? Which, by the way, the marriage vows that we recite at the altar, they're not in the Bible, but that's the sidebar. But we use those as the framework for our relationships. And we want the illusion of perfection. I mastered the illusion of perfection, and trying to pretend to be perfect is exhausting. I would much rather be my imperfect, God-loving self than to walk around in pretense as if I haven't suffered from anxiety and I never needed Zoloft, as if I never wet the bed as a child because of my anxiety. I didn't have fingernails until I was in the 10th grade. Wow. Because I bit my nails constantly. And so as a child, then turning into a woman, you then don't know what a healthy relationship is. You don't know. And then, there are lies that are floating around society that says, well, anything that worth having is worth fighting for. Not if we fighting, fussing, and cussing. Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely not. There are relationships that are able to exist without there being violence and abuse, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, financial, or spiritual. There are plenty of relationships that exist that are whole and wholesome. And when you're ready to live that, then that is what will come to you.
Yeah. When you're ready to live
that. When you're ready to live that. Because you have to deal with your own stuff first.
You tell me what, and we had a little glitch, technical difficulty, so I apologize for that, but we're good now. But tell me, and I apologize if you said it and I missed it, but what did that perfection look like for you personally?
Oh, I didn't mention it. Perfection looks like this. Your hair is always in place. I hid behind weaves, wigs, braids for I don't know how long. And it was in January, it was the night of the Oscars, all I know. And I just decided to go into the bathroom because, I'm a kitchen magician, beautician. And I went into the bathroom with my clippers and I just cut my hair. Yeah. I just cut it off. And,
you sent me a text like, I just shaved my head. And I'm like, stop it, stop lying. And you sent the picture. I was like, but it's gorgeous. Like I was just it looks beautiful. Like you are more beautiful than you've ever been before.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So perfection is the weaves, it's the makeup, it's the clothes, it's the car you drive, it's the zip code, it's the way you clap your hands, it's the clothes you wear on Sunday morning, it's the way you say, oh, I'm blessed and highly favored, knowing good and doggone well that's not how you feel today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But we want to appear perfect because the idea that we are human, we think is offensive to others, but when it's actually an offense to God, because as long as you pretend to be perfect, God really can't work on you. God can't do a thing with you because of the level of pretense.
You got to say that again, and then it will pass the plate. You gotta say that.
God can't do it. God can't do a thing with your pretense. God can't do a thing with your.
We gotta get some hearts on that one on Facebook Live.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
God can't work with that.
Yeah.
What God does value is a heart that, and I think maybe last year I started closing church with the phrase, let's live better today than we did yesterday. That's my goal every day, because I understand that I'm not perfect. And I never have been one to want anyone to put me up on a pedestal, because the fall can be deadly. Yeah. So I would much rather be my authentic, imperfect self and be able to walk right with myself and right with God than to try to please you by looking perfect. And if my imperfection makes you uncomfortable, I don't apologize.
But doesn't it feel better not to even have to try to hold up this allure of perfection? Yeah. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of
energy. And then you find yourselves in relationships that aren't what they should be. Because you enter into these relationships as adults with men and women and things like that. You enter into relationships as a representative. Yeah. And so they never get to know you. They never get to see you. I recently started seeing a gentleman, and I said to him, how do you really feel about natural hair? If you don't like natural hair, you really not gonna like me. Before we ever met, like, you don't like natural hair, you not gonna like me, because I'm not putting nothing else on my head. But we enter into these relationships where they bring their representative, you bring your representative, and no one is ever themselves.
And that person in that relationship potentially could have gone through similar experiences and is looking for this falsehood of perfection too.
Absolutely.
So
they too are hiding.
Yeah.
They're hiding.
Yeah. So people come into relationships, and we all have been, at this age, we've been in numerous relationships. We had the great show last week on relationships. And what are some of the,
by the way?
Thank you. What are some of the things that we typically would maybe experience but not realize that this type of behavior is a result of the traumatized brain? Because trauma changes the brain. It reorganizes and restructures the brain. So people who are easily triggered, the individual that witnessed domestic violence growing up is no different, very similar in their emotional response and their nervous system response to a combat veteran returning from war, where, there could be something very benign that typically would not arouse any type of reaction in someone who has not been traumatized, that all of a sudden this person's triggered. And you may say something that you didn't even realize would elicit the response that it did. And all of a sudden this person has an attitude, or they're assaultive, or they're angry. And, did you even find yourself like being aggressive or?
Oh, yes. Well, it could be something as simple as, when you talk about people in relationships and those who've experienced abuse, because of the things that we've experienced, we've witnessed, we've seen, we've heard, there are various triggers that may happen in those relationships that then take you back to the very moment that you saw it, you heard it, you experienced it. So you tend to be rather anxious when it comes to relationships. A person may mean well, I'll give you an example. So if someone says, we're going out Friday, and something actually happens where they can't make Friday, and they call you and they say, well, Rose, I'm sorry, we can't go out Friday, blah, 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 blah happened. I know I promised to take you out, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you had ever been disappointed or felt manipulated or coerced, whether secondhand or firsthand, by someone who assaulted you or was abusive towards you, that then triggers a fight or flight within you. For me, I had to learn how to argue fairly.
Yeah.
Because
you talk about what you learned. What does that fight or flight looks like? So,
well, for me,
so the woman who's now been told that this is not going to happen, or the man, what happens as a result?
Okay, so for someone who's experienced abuse, they immediately think that this person is out to get them. They think that this person is deliberately trying to hurt them. They believe this person can't be trusted. They believe that this person's behavior may escalate into other things later. And so the fight or flight is, let me leave this relationship now. Let me sabotage this relationship now. And you become your own saboteur. Yeah. In relationships, and you create scenarios. Yeah, you create scenarios that may not even be happening. So if they say they're going to call you back and they don't call you back. For example, they say they're going to call you back and they don't call you back. Then in your mind, you may have created an entire scenario that they were out with someone else and someone else has their attention and they're not thinking about you, or they just want to hurt you, or they're taking you for granted. And when in actuality, they fell asleep and forgot to call you back, or they fell asleep and they just didn't call you back. You create these scenarios in your mind. You go back to what is familiar. Mm-hmm. And what is familiar to you is being coerced. It's being misunderstood, it's being taken for granted, it's being emotionally assaulted, mm-hmm. It's being intellectually degraded. If someone corrects you, if you've experienced that, someone degrading you intellectually, and then you get into a relationship with someone who tries to correct you, you immediately think that this person is trying to degrade you, yeah. When in actuality, they're simply trying to inform you. But it's those switches in our minds, because we've been exposed to abuse as children, as adolescents. And you and I have talked about this before. I was so accustomed to keeping secrets and not telling about the horrors or what I saw as horror that happened in my childhood or in my home, that when I was in college and I was a victim of date rape, I told no one. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I told absolutely no one. And I've been married twice. Yes. And I told neither one of my husbands, wow, that I had been a victim of date rape. Yeah. Because I kept secrets. And I figured, it was my fault. I blamed myself. I wondered, what did I do to put myself in that situation? I wondered, what would people think about me if I shared that with them? And so you go into relationship closed. Mm-hmm. And if you're closed, then how can someone even get to know you or even attempt to love the authentic you?
That's contrary to intimacy, being closed. Yeah, yeah. You can't achieve any level of intimacy, and sex is not intimacy. Sex is easy. That's easy to do. Correct. We don't even have to have an IQ to do that. At all. But intimacy is where the work comes in, where you have to do the work yourself.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And you and I have conversations about the misinterpretation of scripture, yes. The weaponizing of scripture, where and I wrote this, that what abuse does is it tears away at your God-given dominion, one terrifying moment at a time. Mm. So in scripture, what many people don't discuss is the fact that when God created the heaven and the earth, and in Genesis, the creation narrative, and he gets to man and woman, he makes them in his image and in his likeness. God, the triune God, creates them and gives them dominion, mm-hmm. over everything else that God had created, except one another.
Wow. Except
one another. Man was never given dominion over the woman. Oh. Woman was never given dominion over the man. This is
the first I've heard this interpretation.
Stick with me.
It's still with you for nearly.
But they were never given dominion over one another. Mm-hmm. So if we understand that the triune God has given us dominion and authority, and that the triune God has given us free will and strength and intellect and his spirit, then certainly we are to complement one another.
Absolutely.
People often use Ephesians chapter 5. They use verse 21. They forget about verse 21 where it says submit to one another. And they skip down to the point where it says about the husband being the head of the wife. Well, it also says that he's the head of the wife just as Christ is the head of the church. And at no point has Christ ever abused the church. What he did was he gave his life for her. So when men come into our lives, or when our significant others want to take a substantial position in our lives, what they must ask themselves is, am I willing to die? Am I willing to shed my blood to defend, to protect, to cover, to provide? Am I willing to do that? Because that is the position of Christ.
Rule, control, dominate.
Yeah. As opposed to that, one of my friends, Spencer Murray, we went to ETS together. He wrote a phenomenal book about the indoctrination of men from the time that they're little boys, that they're taught not to cry. They're taught not to show any emotion. You can either be happy or mad as hell. Though the only two emotions you're allowed to have, you're supposed to go out there, get as many women as you possibly can. And because you have dominion.
Yes.
And you're a man and you're the head, and they don't realize that when we're teaching little boys this, and then you're teaching little girls to be sensitive, and you're teaching little girls to delve into their emotions. When you don't teach little girls properly, when you don't teach little boys properly, they end up being, and then you expose them to violence.
Yeah.
Not just in the home, but in the streets. On television, you expose them to violence. And so they come into these relationships. And my research shown that the single never married group did not understand all that encompassed abuse. They didn't understand that emotional abuse even existed. They didn't understand that psychological abuse even existed. The single never married group, they thought that, you're supposed to argue and fuss in relationships.
Which
means that there's a lot of work that we must do.
So those of us who did not grow up in homes where we witnessed, domestic violence, but we married individuals that did, and you get into that environment, and things that you don't expect to trigger a person are triggering a person.
Right.
Or, this fallacy of, two people that love each other, so what's the big deal? We should be able to get along. There should be no issues. We don't consider all the pre-existing trauma that comes there that has reorganized this person's nervous system. So situations of just even having a function at your house, and maybe someone says something and it's a flashback for that person. And all of a sudden there's an outburst, or there's some aggressive act, or there's a shutdown. Those of us who've never experienced that, we don't know what's going on, and we can find ourselves, and I'm speaking from experience, in situations where you're trying to, heal something that is out of your hands, or you're trying to figure something out that is not for you to even explore, because this person has not even taken the time to look within themselves and recognize the impact that that's had on it. So, relationship after relationship after relationship. And for yourself, like you said, you draw people in who you share your secrets, or you draw people in, or these people, what I discovered is that people wanted me to now be the secret keeper. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
People wanted me to, if they shut down on me and didn't talk to me for months at a time, but then you get company over in there, oh, hello,
That's right.
Happy couple.
You put on a smile. You act as if it's
but I was expected to do it. And for me, it was the most bizarre thing in the world, because it's like, where does this come from? But again, in understanding the emotional, the social emotional, impact that this has on the individual, this is their norm. And the expectation is, this is what relationship is supposed to look like. And there are so many people, in my years of practice, I've had so many couples to come in where you have one, member of the couple that was exposed to domestic violence, and you have the other who may not have been. And it's a constant battle, because it's so much misinterpretation going on amongst them. And even with awareness, even with the person understanding that this, I perceive this the wrong way, that conditioning runs so deep. So tell us, how does the healing start? How can those who recognize this, maybe in themselves, or recognize this in a significant other or a partner, how can this healing begin?
Well, the first step is to break the silence. You have to break the silence and have uncomfortable conversations. For some families, breaking the silence draws them closer. For some members of my family, it has put a wedge between us because I've broken silence. It makes people uncomfortable to have those conversations. But if you want to preserve that relationship, then you have to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations. And one thing that we teach in the church, which does not apply in every situation, is people are taught, well, you got to forgive. We got to forgive and move on. You still dealing with that. You still dealing with that. You got to forgive and move on. Well, how about this? I don't have to move on until I've dealt with it and expressed how it made me feel. I have a right to address how it made me feel and what my experience was without someone trying to downplay or sweep over with some large paintbrush of beautiful bright paint the darkness of my brokenness. And so it begins with an authentic conversation. A person or persons need to get into counseling, and not necessarily with your ministerial leader if you're a part of a church, because they may not be equipped, they may not have the background, they may not have the resources. You need a clinician, someone who specializes in this area to have these conversations, and you may not need to go to counseling together. One wonderful thing that the church does is we'll corral around the victim and we support them. One thing that we don't do is we don't have resources available for the perpetrator. Yeah. So even if they don't want it, we make it available. If we want to heal on both sides, and then once healing takes place, then there can possibly be reconciliation, and after reconciliation we can move toward forgiveness. Yeah, but I don't have to forgive just because you said I have to.
I'm so glad you said that.
I don't have to.
Because the people
not yet, not until I've dealt with how it's made me feel, and we've had an authentic conversation. And for the person to say, well, I apologize, well, the apology needs to come with changed behavior. Until the apology comes with changed behavior, then the apology is hollow.
And not temporary change behavior. Not, I'm gonna go in this state they want me in temporarily until I can get back to where I need to be or want to be, and then I can go back to business as usual. But for change, measurable change behavior, it requires a person to go within. And I oftentimes will tell people, come by yourself. They need to come by themselves. It's not a marital issue.
Correct.
It's not a relationship issue. I appreciate what you said a few minutes ago about how you guys provide services for the perpetrator as well, because the perpetrator, what we have to remember is that the perpetrator is wounded as well. This
Absolutely.
is a wounded soul. Doesn't mean that means you endure this type of abuse.
Absolutely.
Because oftentimes the victim recognizes this person is wounded, which is their excuse to stay there, because I need to nurture.
I need to help them.
I need to help them. They get the love they needed from their parents or their family or what have you. I can get it.
Job to help.
It's not your job to heal the wounded. It's not your job to heal them. It's their job to heal themselves. Yeah, but I do appreciate the fact that you guys will offer that.
Well, it does not happen. My church doesn't even have it available. To whereas we can say, well, to the person who's been doing the abuse or committing the abuse, here's a place where you can go. I do want to make it known to those who are watching that, in Metro Detroit, you not only have the Detroit Police Department that has a domestic abuse unit, that where their sole job and responsibility is to handle abuse. But you also have in Metro Detroit, you have Interim House in Metro Detroit, which is a domestic abuse shelter. It's the only one inside of the city of Detroit. And then in Plymouth, you have First Step. And one thing that First Step does that I'm a strong advocate for is that they provide support systems for domestic abuse victims. So even if you need someone to go to court with you, because again, it's about control, these are fear tactics and things of that nature, and you just may need someone to go along with you. And so those resources are available. But again, when it comes to families, and the first part is to have an uncomfortable conversation. I used my family as my focus group for my dissertation, for my doctoral study. And just so happens it was a Christmas. We had Christmas.
Did they,
and the day after Christmas,
were they expecting it?
Well, they knew that I was going to share my my research, and I was going to use them as a group. I wanted them to help me with my research. And so I did have some members of my family who opted out.
Okay.
They didn't even want to sit in the room. And then I had some members of my family who actually participated in the discussion. And what it was a 1 hour, maybe a 1 hour and a half presentation and conversation about abuse, their thoughts about abuse, their thoughts about it from the Christian perspective, why they believe it happens to women, why they believe it happens to men, why they believe people stay. And in the room were some family members who were either in abusive relationships at the time, or were at one time in abusive relationships. And what happened as a result of that conversation, because it had to be real clinical, because I was recording and it was for the purpose of doctoral study, it was clinical for my part, but they got to ask or talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. And after that hour and a half, Rose, I had to go take a nap because I was exhausted from facilitating. My family talked for another 2 hours.
Wow.
About abuse.
It was probably very releasing for
them. Yeah. Because how many families get together and they never have a conversation, and you know it exists in your family.
You open that
door.
know
grandma rules the family with an iron fist, and she just gets a pass because that's how she's been. She's always been that way. She hit granddaddy with the rolling pin. Ha 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 ha. That is abuse.
I remember that. Yeah, growing up.
That is abuse. That is a form of control. We talk about, our loved ones who we know are in relationships that are emotionally draining, having impact on their physical bodies. I have relatives right now who have physical issues because of the emotional strain of a relationship that is anything but loving.
And if you guys don't think that's possible, trust me, nothing happens on a physical level without first happening on an emotional level. The issues are in the tissues. It was once there. So again, these autoimmune disorders, what the research is showing, that when I studied and just prepared for this podcast here, the research was showing just how inflammatory disease, which most disease
long term for the rest of the victim's life.
For the rest of your life. And so that's the physical aspect. And we're not even talking about the emotional impact that it has. But oftentimes people will find themselves giving their bodies permission to become physically ill, because that is nurtured in our communities.
Correct.
That is tended to. That is, there's no shame when you say I have cancer. There's no shame when you say I have lupus, or I have whatever this disease may be, but not realizing that this manifested from emotional trauma that has locked in your body.
Emotional, psychological, that you compartmentalize, you put it away. And so now your body is responding to that toxin, that's in your body. Your body is responding to the toxin. Like I was sharing, I bit my fingernails, I wet the bed. I was 30 when my nightmares stopped. So here I am, a 30-year-old woman. My parents divorced when I was 14 and a half. And here I am, a 30-year-old woman, 15, 16 years later, still waking up screaming. I mean, at the top of my lungs. And when we don't take time to get to know the people that we're dating, the people we're in relationship with, when we don't take the time to find out what was your childhood like? You all spoke on it last week. What was your childhood like? What was your home life like? What was your family like?
Yes.
Having that conversation gives us an in-depth view into how that person has processed life Not to mention the spiritual aspect of it, because some people in Christendom, they cover up the abuse with God. They become addicted to all things church. They're addicted to serving. They're addicted to showing up. They're addicted to all things church, because church becomes the comforter for the pain they refuse to address. So then it manifests in other ways.
This is coming from Reverend Doctor. Y'all hear this? So understand, understand, because that becomes for an addiction.
Church becomes an addiction. So they're always there. And then the trauma manifests itself in other ways. So they overeat. They don't take care of themselves, but they love God. They love God.
Destructive, self-destructive, because that's overeating and self-destructive.
Unhealthy behavior, unhealthy lifestyle, or they're the meanest people in the church. They're the meanest usher. They're the meanest choir member. And it's because of trauma that has never been addressed.
I tell people, instead of asking, when you meet someone new, instead of asking, what's your dream?
What's your favorite color?
What's your favorite?
What high school did you go to?
What high school did you go to? You like dogs? You got a cat?
Do you like dogs?
Instead of asking those questions, ask them, how have you dealt with your past traumas?
Right.
That's going to give you, if a person's willing to be open and honest with you, that's going to expose you to the truth of who this person is.
Right.
Behind the mask.
Right.
Behind the perfection,
right.
Behind the wigs, behind the and there's nothing wrong with wigs and weave, but
right. I wore it for a long time.
behind the designer bags and the luxury cars, and like you said, the zip codes and all that stuff that, for us, we attach ourselves to, because it means that we're perfect and everyone, they can't see.
And we're successful. And nothing's wrong with us.
And nothing's wrong with us. You can't see my trauma. You can't see my trauma past this $10,000 I'm wearing on me.
Which is the danger in the pervasiveness of abuse, because we look for one indicator. We look for black eyes. We look for bruises. Yes. We look for some sign of physical trauma. When a person is exposed to emotional and mental abuse, the light in their eyes begins to dim. They're no longer, they become a shadow of themselves. You hear me? Yes. They become a shadow of themselves, and the light that naturally would exist within their spirit has been dimmed to the point where it's non-existent.
Well, I can say you look brighter than you ever did, girlfriend.
Well, thank you, girl. Thank you.
Life treating you.
It was writing this dissertation was painful, but it was also very therapeutic for me. And it put me in a place where I am more than loving toward myself. And when I hear or see things that don't sound right and don't feel right, I speak up. I'm a strong advocate for myself. If something doesn't feel right, doesn't look right, doesn't sit right with me, I speak up. And I'm not worried about anyone's thoughts about how perfect I appear. Neither am I in some type of competition to win your perfect pageant. I could care less about your perfect pageant.
Love it.
I'd rather be authentic.
Yeah, and she'll send me text now and say, I love me, just out the blue.
I love me.
Love yourself, girlfriend.
Right.
So I want to, we're going to be wrapping up. I want you to give advice to the person who's now in a household, female or male, who with children, who may think these children don't know what's going on. Like you said, you didn't witness it, but you could, and even if you can't hear it, like they said, anytime the research has shown babies in utero and babies sleeping, that's exposed to abuse, are impacted by it. It doesn't matter that it is absorbed, it's an energy. Right. So what advice would you give to someone who has children in the home now, and this is what's going on, be it verbal abuse, be it emotional abuse, be it actual physical abuse?
Well, the first thing that some people would say is get up, pack your stuff, and leave. It is not that simple sometimes. You need a strategy. You need possibly to consult with someone about the risks so that you can get a plan of action together. Um, and then your plan of action must include therapy for yourself and for your children. Mm-hmm. So it's not just as simple as getting up and leaving. You need to be smart about it. You need to be wise about the moves that you're making, especially if you're dealing with someone who is volatile. And the truth about abuse is that it is unpredictable. And anyone who will say that they will kill you and themselves and the children if they're suicidal, they're homicidal. Yeah. Yeah. So you need to be careful about how you plan to leave. Yeah. And you need to do it in a wise way. You may need to consult with someone. So again, the Detroit Police Department has a domestic abuse unit. Interim House in the city of Detroit has a phone line that's always open. First Step in Plymouth, which is also inside of Wayne County, has a 1-800 number that's always available. There are hotlines that are available, and I know that you're going to post them online so people can get that information. If you choose, and they are prepared, you can consult with your religious leader and share with them what may be going on with you, but be prepared if they don't have the information that you need. Mm-hmm. You want to speak with someone who has knowledge about resources, places you can go, people you can speak with, and then they can support you as you move through the process. I've gone as far as to go to court with a church member, mm-hmm. just so that she could have someone physically present there with her during the proceedings. And so you need someone who's willing to walk with you through the process, not just say to you, go home and be a more obedient wife. If that is what your religious leader says to you, you need to leave that place of worship immediately. Yes. Because that is a person who does not understand scripture and certainly is more interested in saving face and keeping the church together. I say this, if we're not willing to make abuse uncomfortable within our congregations, what we're saying to the victim is we'd rather have your funeral before we'll see you divorced. That's what we're saying. Mm-hmm. We need to prepare ourselves, and we need to invite in, experts and clinicians who've done the research and who are aware of the steps that need to be taken.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I want to, coming from a psychological perspective as a clinician, just share with you all out there, if you are in this situation now and you have children, just understand, I'm seeing those children as adults now, 10, 20 years from now, when your child is struggling in adult relationships, when they're struggling with depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, for young men who witness, domestic violence in the home, they tend to become, perpetrators of violence. And it doesn't have to even be domestic violence. Our prisons are full of men who witness domestic violence in the home. Yes. For children who witness this, they are a higher incident of having learning disabilities in school. Yes. So you, from just the onset, you are already just stacking the chips against them, because now they're dealing with learning. They can't focus. They can't concentrate. The traumatized brain cannot learn. Right. Cannot learn. So there's a higher incidence of learning disability, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, just all those things that no parent wants their child to experience. Right. And you think once the child gets out the home, or even once the man gets out the home, it's over. No, those effects, as Reverend April has told you, those effects are long lasting, 30 years old and still having nightmares. This is 15 years later. Right. So I want to just encourage those of you who are in this situation, where these maladaptive behaviors are occurring in the home. You have to get the courage. You have to get the courage, get a support group to do what needs to be done now, because healing can happen.
Yes.
So even if your children have been exposed, we have a perfect example right here of this beautiful young lady glowing in front of us right now, who was able to, you know, reveal. They say you can't heal what you don't reveal, but able
Right.
to just be transparent and open up her journey to the world, where now she's helping thousands of individuals all over, you know, the world, and it's going to be millions soon. So, you know, you all can say I had her.
I'll take that. I'll take that.
So I want to thank you, but we're going to do the little fun thing that I want to do at the end of all my podcasts. I like to do a personality inventory on everyone. I send it to them before the show so they can do a personality inventory. And we also do their numerology numbers just to see, you know, how it stacks up against who they are. And it, you know, it always does, but we know we did it before, you know. So those of you, again, followed me for years, have been in my workshops, retreats, you know what this all means. But the Reverend Dr. April is a tulip.
Yes, so, I am.
She is a tulip, a standalone tulip. No, she'll welcome one other person here. One other person. But basically, that's a type that, you know, very, and this is perfect because very innovative, analytical. Mm-hmm. Again, the fact that you blended science, you know, you have this science background. You taught middle school science for what, 11 years?
10 years.
10 years. DPS, guys, DPS. She taught middle school science for 10 years. But now she's blending that. When we talk and when she educates me, you know, on scripture and religious, because even though I went to church all my life growing up, I don't any information.
I'm a Sunday school teacher.
I love the fact of how she's able to be open to these things. So when I talk about, girl, I want to teach you about numerology, she's not looking like, no, girl, that's anti-Christian or, you know, religious or what have you. So she innovative. Just these are the people that change systems. Yeah. These are and I want you to hear that, because I've been telling you for years, you are a change agent and you're going to change just this whole narrative on this topic, and it's needed. And her life path number in numerology happens to be a 9. Yeah. And a 9 is, these are the people of the world. These are our humanitarians. They, in a lot of ways, belong to the world. So, you know, again, the work that she's doing now, coming into her truth, now she's really stepping into being able to do that. Girlfriend even got a speaking engagement in Australia, down under the other side of the world. So it's already starting to happen. But you're able to really be in the fullness and the light of these things, of your true self. Yes. You know, your true personality, your true life path. You're only able to really plug into that because you've made the decision, the commitment, and you've done the hard work to be authentically you. And for that, I thank you. And I thank you for sharing your story here today.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. It's been my privilege and my pleasure to spend this time with my girlfriend.
And y'all know we're going to talk after this. But anyway.
Right, I'll call you in a minute.
We're going to talk after this. But also, if you can, and I was just looking to see, we got some folks saying, I'm a tulip too. But if you can just commit to some of the folks over the next few days, because I'm sure it's questions on here to go on and kind of answer.
My pleasure.
Guys, I also want to encourage you all. First of all, tell them how they can follow you.
Well, you can follow me on Facebook. I post every now and again on Facebook. I'm going to become more diligent, but if you inbox me questions or comments, or you want to have a discussion, I'm more than open to do that. I will be taking pre-orders for the book. See, I will be taking pre-orders for the book mid-August, toward the end of August. It is titled Behind the Veil: Domestic Abuse in Christian Homes. And it is my research project, my baby. I want to let it be known that I'm not the only person in the world doing research about domestic abuse in Christian homes. There are several, but I'm honored to join the ranks of those who have already laid the foundation and began the work, because that is a conversation that is much needed, and it is a conversation that many people want to have, but unfortunately have not had anyone to facilitate it. And so I'm willing and ready to step into the places that God would desire for me to occupy.
Oh, that star is just beginning to rise. I know that. It's a pleasure to watch. It's a pleasure to watch. So I want to first of all, thank everyone for joining me tonight. This has been just packed. I love it. I love it. That's, just these conversations, candid, needed conversations that we're having. I want to encourage you guys, if you have a topic that you'd like for me to cover, or you have a story that you'd like to share, because the growth is in, and the healing is in absolutely being able to share your story, because in that you heal others, and there's power in that. So if you have a story you'd like to share, please inbox me, message me, or you can email me at drroseshow@gmail.com. Join my Patreon. I have a Patreon private group, and we do even behind the scene things. So I know I'm gonna have you on there soon, and we're gonna be doing some girlfriend chat on that too. That's for exclusive content, and there's all types of other benefits. I had several of my members all day coming here to the center today to actually get complimentary brain training, and that's a new service that we're offering here at the center. So several of them came and took advantage of that, and that's just for being a member of the Patreon group. So I encourage you guys to do that as well. But thank you. Share this video, comment, ask your questions, and I'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye, Dr. Rose.
Bye-bye.